This video is going to discuss the use of rhetorical devices, including the manipulation of sound and syntactical elements to increase the power and impact of your writing. Let's dive in. Hi there, I'm Luke Morris with Creative Writing Corner. What are rhetorical devices? Well, first, most simply, they're devices of rhetoric. What is rhetoric? Rhetoric is the use of language. That is the broadest, most simple definition. It's simply the use of language. More specifically, it's the use of language to prove a point, either to deliver a message or to sway an audience, to convince. That's what rhetoric is. So how do rhetorical devices differ from literary devices? Well, literary devices are the traditional kinds of things when you're looking at fiction, drama, or poetry that your English teacher tells you to look for. You're looking for characterization, symbolism, motif, theme, mood, irony, foreshadowing, flashback, all that kind of stuff. Those are literary devices. Rhetorical devices are primarily seen as tools of nonfiction as opposed to the more literary types of writing. They're the tools of speeches, of articles, particularly of op-eds, of essays, the kind of writing that you're supposed to do when you're in school. But really, the distinction is pretty arbitrary. All literature, any kind of great literature, is going to use all the rhetorical devices. Any kind of good rhetoric is going to incorporate a lot of the literary devices, including things like characterization, foreshadowing, and mood, because you're going to employ narrative in nonfiction. So, the distinction is not super clear, but we're focusing more right now on the rhetorical devices. So some devices of content, some devices of sound, and some devices of syntax. Syntax being order and arrangement of words and other linguistic elements. So I'm going to divide rhetorical devices three ways. I'm going to divide them into syntactical devices, sound devices, and content devices, or diction devices. Let's break those down right now. The first I'm going to talk about here are syntactical devices. These are things like repetition, anaphora, and epistrophe. Repetition and anaphora and epistrophe are all forms of repetition. They're all matters of syntax and diction as well. Diction being word choice, where you take words and choose which words to repeat in certain places. Anaphora is when you repeat words or phrases at the beginning of successive phrases, clauses, or sentences. Epistrophe is when you repeat words or phrases at the end of successive phrases, clauses, or sentences. All different varieties of repetition. That's one syntactical device. Another syntactical device is asyndeton and polysyndeton. It has to do with how you use conjunctions. So polysyndeton is where you take a list of things, A, B, and C, and you replace those commas with conjunctions, A and B and C. A lot of writers do this. Ernest Hemingway was a huge fan of it. As a matter of fact, he almost never used commas. He used this device a lot. The other device is the inverse of that, asyndeton. That's where you remove any conjunction. So instead of A, B, and C, it's A, B, C. And you see this a lot in rhetoric. You see poets do it a lot. And this is used for kind of a shortening, punchier impact, giving equal weight to each thing, and even sometimes even more weight to the very last thing said. The other syntactical devices I'll talk about have to do with parallelism and balanced sentences. Balanced sentences are sentences of two parts that equally weigh, they have equal length and are of equal importance. And these devices are called antithesis and chiasmus. And they involve an inversion, either an inversion of mood or tone, basically from positive to negative, negative to positive, that would be antithesis, or an inversion of words or ideas in the second half from the first half, so that would be chiasmus, when the words are inverted. A line from Frederick Douglass says, "He was just the man for such a place, and it was just the place for such a man." That's chiasmus. The words place and man have been inverted in the second half. There's no antithesis there because the ideas are complementary. Another quote from Frederick Douglass that uses antithesis, "What he most loved, that I most hated." Right? So the idea of love and hate, two different concepts opposing each other, that's antithesis. Moving beyond syntactical devices, we have sound devices, also known as poetic devices. These are things like alliteration, assonance, and consonance, which is the repetition of sounds. The repetition of sounds at the beginning, that would be alliteration. The repetition of vowel sounds within the word would be assonance. The repetition of consonant sounds within the word would be consonance, of course. If you combine assonance and consonance, which is the repetition of those vowel and consonant sounds, you get a little something called rhyme. So that's how you get rhymes, with assonance and consonants. And alliteration is just the repeating of those beginning sounds. I'd love to lick a lemon lollipop. Another sound device is onomatopoeia. That's when you use words like slap or bang or flop that basically sound like what they're describing. That's onomatopoeia. And last, we come to content devices. These are devices that depend upon what you're actually saying, as opposed to just the structure of what you're saying or the sound of what you're saying. So these are things like apostrophe and rhetorical question. Apostrophe, I don't mean the punctuation mark, I mean the act of talking to someone or something who is not there or who you do not expect to answer. So this could be when a character, say, lifts up a human skull, alas, poor Yorick, or when a character talks to God, or when a character speaks directly to the reader, not expecting the reader to answer him. That's an apostrophe. A rhetorical question, you probably know what that is. That was when you ask a question to which you do not expect an answer. The reason you don't expect an answer is because the answer is already implied in the question. You expect people to automatically assume the answer, given that you've just posed the question. So you don't expect them to actually answer it, because there's only one possible way it can be correctly answered. That's a rhetorical question. Another content device is aphorism or idiom. Those are separate things, but similar. They're both kind of pithy little statements used to convey a general truth. Aphorisms especially are used to convey what someone should do. So things like loose lips sink ships, people in glass houses shouldn't throw stones. Those are aphorisms. They can also fall into idioms, but idioms is a broader term because it's raining cats and dogs can be an idiom. But since that doesn't really tell anyone what to do, it doesn't give any prescription to it, it's not an aphorism per se. Allusion and anecdote. Allusion is not just a rhetorical device, but it's also a literary device. That's when you call out in one work another work. Basically, if a character from mythology is referenced in a modern fiction novel, that is allusion. If a character from history somehow makes a passing appearance or has a passing reference in, say, a contemporary play, that would be an allusion. Allusion is when one thing calls out another thing. It's an intertextual reference, not just with text, but also with history and biography and art and other things like that. But they call it an intertextual reference. That's what an allusion is, when you allude to something or someone else. An anecdote is a short story usually used to illustrate a point. Oftentimes it is a true story, at least a true story from the point of view of the person telling the story, which could be a fictional character in a fictional novel telling a fictional story, but a story that is true for them within their world. But it's an anecdote is that short little story meant to prove a point. And then, of course, irony. Irony is also an aspect of fiction and literature. There are three different types of irony. There's verbal irony, there's dramatic irony, and there's situational irony. Verbal irony, nobody knows what that is. Situational irony is when the situation within the thing that you're watching or reading twists on itself, when there's something unexpected happens that you kind of should have predicted but you couldn't predict. That's the twist. The unexpected twist is situational irony. And then dramatic irony is when you know something as the reader or the audience member that somebody in the cast, somebody in the story does not know. So we know when we're watching the play Hamlet, when Claudius is praying, asking God forgiveness for his sin of killing his brother, that Hamlet is watching from right behind him, plotting to kill him right then. Claudius does not know this. That is dramatic irony. So thank you guys for dropping in, and please, if you've enjoyed this content, hit like and subscribe. That was just a brief overview of some of the rhetorical devices and really quick descriptions of them. I'm going to go into detail on most of these devices in individual videos going on. So please like and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss those videos. I will show you how to use them in your writing. I promise I'm not going to leave you hanging here. But those are just an introduction to some of the rhetorical devices that you might want to look into using in your writing for it to have more power and more impact. Thanks for tuning in, guys. I'll see you next time. Till then, peace.